My name is Bunny Foster, and I'm 42 years old. On the first Tuesday of March, a doctor in Traverse City gave me 6 to 9 months to live, and 40 minutes later, in a cold parking lot, I practiced how I would tell my husband. I never got to say it. That evening, standing in the doorway of my own cider house, I heard Gerald laughing into his phone in a voice I hadn't heard in years. And what I caught of that call put a stop to every plan I'd made. I drove to that appointment, a wife with bad news. I walked out of that cider house, a woman with a deadline. What I did over the next 6 months, my family still talks about in whispers. The papers I signed before anyone knew to stop me. The secret I carried through chemo chairs and a courtroom. The Harvest Festival, where I said the last thing anyone expected me to say. And what Gerald finally learned at the very end, standing in a room full of people who already knew. Nobody in this town will ever forget it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where women who kept their voices low tell you about the moments they feel quiet inside. Stories about family, betrayal, and the quiet kind of justice. If that sounds like your kind of story, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To know what I was protecting, you'd have to see it in October. Foster Orchard sits on 140 acres outside Harlow's Mill, about 40 minutes south of Traverse City, and in picking season, the whole hillside smells like cider and wood smoke. My first husband, Tom Foster, planted half those rows with his own hands. We were married 14 years. We raised 2 kids in the farmhouse. My daughter, Marin, who inherited my stubbornness and my handwriting, and my son, Caleb, who can fix any machine built before he was born. Tom died 8 years ago. A heart attack between the Honeycrisp rows on a perfect September morning. He was there for breakfast and gone by lunch. I was 34. People assumed I'd sell. Instead, I learned the spray schedules, took over the books, and carried that farm through 2 spring freezes that wiped out half the county's crop. Every October, we threw the Harvest Festival, same as Tom's parents did. Hay wagon, cider press running all day, kids sticky to the elbows. Marin was 21 now, studying agricultural business up in Traverse City and coming home every weekend the farm asked her to. Caleb was 17, a high school senior, already better with machines than men twice his age. 2 kids raised in the rows where their father dropped his hat. That was my whole ledger right there. For a year I ran it alone and told myself alone was just quiet with more chores. Then, at a co-op equipment auction on a rainy Thursday, a man in a good jacket bid against me for a sprayer, lost on purpose, and made me laugh in the parking lot. I wanted on the record, I was careful. I'd buried a husband and raised a farm from grief, but careful, it turns out, has a shelf life. His name was Gerald Mercer, sales manager at the equipment dealership. 42 years old, widowed once. Charming in that easy way that makes waitresses remember your coffee order. He courted me like a grown-up soup when I was sick. No pressure, good boots. After 2 years, I said yes. My lawyer, Harriet Cho, had been handling the farm's papers since Tom died, and she flatly refused to smile until I signed a prenuptial agreement. The farm and the trust Tom and I built would stay mine, separate for the kids. If we ever divorced, Gerald would get $60,000 and his personal things and no claim on the rest. I braced for a fight. Gerald read it once and signed with a flourish. "I'm not here for the orchard, Bunny," he said. "I'm here for the view." Everybody at the wedding thought that was romantic. I kept the name Foster, told him it was simpler for the farm paperwork. That was half the truth. For 5 years, I'll be honest. It was mostly good. He learned every neighbor's name by his first Christmas. He shook every hand at the festival like he'd planted the trees himself. Somewhere along the way, he became the face of Foster Orchards, and I became the woman who did the books behind it. His name crept onto things the way frost creeps onto glass. A card on the farm account for convenience. A signature line at the co-op for convenience. A power of attorney 3 years in, because his buddy's wife had a stroke and it scared us both. For convenience. Convenience is a door you leave unlocked for somebody you trust. You never think to ask who else has noticed it's open. The trouble started in February during pruning. A dull ache in my back that wrapped around to my stomach like a belt pulled 1 notch too tight. I'd had aches my whole working life. You don't farm without them. But this one stayed. Then my appetite went. I dropped nearly 10 pounds without trying, which at my age is a compliment from anybody but a doctor. My hands itched at night. One morning, I noticed my eyes looked a little yellowed in the bathroom mirror, and told myself it was the light bulb. I did what I have always done with a problem, which is handle it myself and keep my mouth shut. I booked a doctor's appointment for a Tuesday. I knew Gerald had his sales circuit, and I scheduled the follow-up ultrasound between 2 cider deliveries so nobody would ask where I was. I didn't tell Marin. I didn't tell Caleb. That's not secrecy. I told myself that's just not making the kids carry a maybe. My business had always been mine to handle. I'd run a farm alone for years while the neighbors waited for me to fail, and I hadn't given them one thing to talk about. The ultrasound tech was a young woman with kind eyes and a chatty streak. And about 2 minutes in, the chatting stopped. Snorts, she kept circling the wand back to the same spot under my ribs, pressing like she was rereading a sentence that wouldn't change. They got me a CT scan 2 days later, which is fast, and fast is never good news in a hospital. Bad? I asked the tech when it was over. She said the radiologist would call. People's eyes answer faster than their mouths. Hers had already told me plenty. The oncologist's name was Dr. Okafor, and I'll thank him forever for not warming it up. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. It had already reached my liver, which meant surgery was off the table before we'd even pulled our chairs in. There was chemotherapy. Not to cure it, he said, but to slow it down, to buy time. How much time? I asked. He said months, not years, with treatment, likely under a year. Untreated, less. He also said 42 was young for this disease and asked about family history. And after I told him what took my mother at 51, he stopped using the word young. I took out the little notebook I use for the farm ledger and wrote it down the way I'd write down a frost date or a fuel price, because my hands needed a job. And neat handwriting was the only thing in that room I could control. I asked 3 questions: what the treatment would take out of me, whether I'd be lucid at the end, and how long I'd stay strong enough to drive. He answered all 3 straight. I remember thinking that I'd planned the farm out 10 years ahead. New rootstock going in next spring, a roof for the cider house the year after, and that somebody else would see all of it. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 40 minutes with my hands at 10 and 2, going exactly nowhere. 42 years old, 2 kids barely grown, 1 harvest left, maybe. I decided I would tell Gerald that night before my nerve went. I practiced it out loud to the rearview mirror like a fool. Gerald, I have cancer. It's the bad kind. We need to talk about what comes next. Simple, level, no drama snorts. I had the words ready and the casserole plan to go with them. I never got to use either one. I came home early. Gerald's truck was by the cider house, and the lights were off inside, which was odd. So, I walked over quiet in my barn shoes. Through the doorway I could hear him on the phone. He was laughing low and easy. A register, I hadn't heard, pointed at me since the 2nd year we were married. I stopped with my hand on the doorframe. Most of it was murmur, but 3 steps closer in the dark between the press and the wall, his words came through clean. Relax, he said. She won't be around forever. Then another laugh, softer. I stood there in the smell of last fall's apples with a fresh death sentence folded in my coat pocket, listening to my husband tell somebody I wouldn't be around forever. He was right, of course. That's what made my ears ring. When my boot found the gravel, he turned, and I watched his whole face change gears. Smooth as an automatic transmission, not one grind. Hey you, he said, parts guy. Tractor clutch is on back order again. I have kept books for 20 years and I can tell you that lies have a bookkeeping all their own. The parts counter closes at 5. It was 6:40. He hung up a personal cell phone that was somehow already in his jacket, and he kissed my cheek, and he asked what was for supper. I heard myself say pot roast. Some part of me had already gone cold and quiet, the way the orchard goes before a hard frost when every living thing pulls its sap down deep, where the freeze can't reach it. I did not tell my husband I was dying. Instinct got there before I did. All night I lay awake wondering who she was, and whose forever he was promising. I gave it 3 days. I watched him the way I watched the sky in late April. Polite on the surface, taking notes underneath. Saturday morning, he left for his sales circuit, 3 days of dealerships downstate, and for once in his tidy life, he forgot his toolbox by the barn door. The bottom tray didn't sit right. Under it lay a phone I'd never seen. No case. No lock screen worth mentioning. His birthday, in fact. I'm not proud of what I did next, and I do it again this afternoon. The messages went back 7 months, all to one contact saved as D hotel confirmations in Traverse City. On nights the calendar in my kitchen said trade shows. A photo I won't describe. Complaints about my wife and her spreadsheets, her 60-cent margins, her sentimental trees, and threaded through the sweet talk business, the lease again and again. Once the lease is signed, we're set. Tell your board it's as good as done. She'll come around. I handle her paperwork. D was Dana Whitfield. Whitfield Packing and Cold Storage. The outfit that had spent a year courting us to lease the cider house, and 30 rows of frontage for 20 years. The deal Gerald kept sliding across my kitchen table like a dinner plate, telling me it was free money, telling me I was being stubborn. The affair and the deal were the same animal. The cheating was the business plan. I laid every message out on the workbench and photographed each screen with my own phone, steady as taking inventory. Then I wiped my prints off with a shop rag out of some instinct I didn't examine and set the phone back under the tray exactly the way I found it. Gerald taught me that trick without knowing it. Leave everything looking untouched. That night I sat in the cider house till morning with a horse blanket and the 2 things I owned. I was dying and the man I'd married was waiting on it. Mostly that night I did arithmetic. Marin and Caleb would be fine in their hearts. They'd buried their father. They knew how. But the farm, the trust Tom and I built, held the land and the cider house, and I was its only trustee. If I died tomorrow, the paperwork would sort itself out eventually. The problem wasn't death. The problem was the stretch just before it. Around 3 a.m, it came to me like ice water down the collar. 2 years ago, in love and being practical, I had signed powers of attorney naming Gerald, medical and financial both. If this disease took my mind before it took my body, and Dr. Okafor had been honest that it might, the man who said she won't be around forever would hold the pen. Snorts. He could sign into my accounts. He could talk to my doctors, decide my care, maybe wheel me somewhere quiet while a lease got signed by a tired old woman who trusted her husband. I had been careful my whole life, and my carefulness had one door left unlocked, and he was already trying the knob. So, I made 2 decisions before sunrise, and I've never once gone back on either. 1, Gerald Mercer would not learn I was dying. He didn't get to grieve me while he robbed me. 2, every paper, every signature, every lock would be finished before the Harvest Festival in October. At 7 sharp, I called Harriet Cho. Gerald wanted my signature on Dana's lease by Labor Day. I decided he'd get my signature on something else entirely. Harriet Cho has been my lawyer for 8 years, and she has a face like a closed filing cabinet, which is exactly what you want. I told her about the phone. I did not tell her about the diagnosis. I wasn't ready for the way her face would change. We spread my life across her conference table like a map before a storm. The good news, Tom and I had built the trust right. The land, the cider house, the equipment, all of it separate property, mine as trustee, untouchable in a divorce. The prenup was clean too. If we divorced, Gerald got $60,000 and his truck. But Harriet kept flipping pages and her pen stopped twice. First stop, if I died while still married. The prenup let Gerald live in my farmhouse for a year, and he'd collect $150,000 from a life insurance policy I'd kept up out of plain decency. Death was a better deal for him than divorce. Let that sink in the way it sank into me. Second stop, the powers of attorney. She slid them across the table like 2 dead mice. These are the emergency. She said this makes him you the minute you can't speak for yourself. I said I wanted it all undone. New documents, new trustee arrangements, and a divorce, quietly in that order and fast. Harriet looked at me a long moment. Quiet costs patience. Bunny, do you have the time? I studied the grain of her nice walnut table. Let's say I have a deadline, I said. Harvest. She didn't push. Good lawyers bill by the hour. Great ones know which questions to leave unasked. We started that same afternoon, and on Tuesday, I started something else I couldn't tell her about either. They put a port under my collarbone on a Thursday, a little plastic button beneath the skin, and the Tuesday after that, I sat down in a vinyl recliner and let them run poison into me on purpose. The regimen had a name like a tractor model, and it came with a bottle I wore home under my flannel for 2 more days. A slow pump the size of a paperback feeding the line while I made supper for a man planning my funeral spending. My cover story was the Quilting Guild. Tuesdays, sometimes overnight at Morin's little apartment in Traverse City, after on account of the early farmers market. The Quilting Guild has never once seen me, neither had my husband, come to think of it, not in years. And I mean that literally. Gerald hadn't really looked at me across a table since our 2nd anniversary. I counted on that. And here is the joke God tells at my expense. His affair gave me my alibi. 3 days a week he was on his circuit or held over in Traverse City. And those were the days I was sickest, hollowed out and gray, hanging on to the bathroom sink. Life has a sense of humor. It's just not a kind one. The infusion nurse was named Yolanda, and she noticed everything and asked nothing, which is the whole job description of an angel. Round 2. I misjudged the schedule. I was on my knees behind the equipment shed, losing my lunch in the weeds when Gerald's truck came up the drive 10 minutes early. I stood, wiped my mouth, and blamed the diesel fumes off the old sprayer. He believed me without slowing down. It stung and it saved me both at once. That was March and April. Poison Tuesdays, paperwork Thursdays, pot roast Sundays. Nobody suspected a thing. Almost nobody. The first papers were the revocations. Harriet drew them up, and I signed the old powers of attorney dead on arrival. The new ones named Marin, my medical voice, my financial hand. The moment I couldn't be either. Getting Marin's signature as my named agent took some doing since I wasn't telling her why. I called it my annual estate cleanup and said, "Every farm family does it this way," which is the kind of thing mothers say when they need a signature without a conversation. She signed at my kitchen table on a Sunday home from classes, but her eyes stayed on me a beat too long. "My daughter has my instincts. You'd tell me if something was wrong," she said. It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer it. Then the bank. I asked them politely to remove the convenience card on the farm operating account, the one with Gerald's name on it. No drama. Accounts get tidied every day. But the branch manager, a careful young man named Peterson, lowered his voice at the end. "Since you're here, Mrs. Foster, Mr. Mercer came in last month asking about a home equity line against the orchard parcel. I told him only the trustee could apply. I thanked him with a face I keep for church, and drove home the long way past the water tower, doing the math out loud. A home equity line. Money against my land asked for behind my back. A month before I ever set foot in that cider house doorway. Whatever he and Dana were building, he'd already tried to make my dirt pay for it. And the only thing that stopped him was a bank teller. And a trust Tom built. Gerald was already trying doors. He just didn't know that I had started changing the locks. Caleb turned 18 at the end of April, and we did the party at the farmhouse. Chic, a bonfire out back, my kitchen loud with everyone I love, and one person I was quietly divorcing. Gerald was magnificent. That's the thing nobody tells you about charming men. The charm is real. He told the story of the runaway hay wagon until Caleb's friends hiccuped from laughing. He two-stepped Marin around the kitchen while the coffee brewed. Marin caught my eye over the cake, like she was checking my temperature, and I smiled at her the way you smile when your whole face is a locked barn. Watching him, I felt like I was seeing footage of my own marriage, a documentary about a good husband. Very convincing, excellent production values. That night, after everyone left, Gerald got quiet over a whiskey, and he told me a true thing. He talked about his father, who took 9 years to die of dementia, and his mother, who spent those 9 years spoon-feeding a man who'd forgotten her name. She went into that room, a wife, he said, and came out a ghost. Nobody should be asked for that. He'd told me pieces before, but I heard it different now, the way you hear a weather report different once you're standing in the field. My husband wasn't only greedy, he was terrified of sickness, of sick rooms, of being asked to stay in one. It explained him. It did not excuse him. Those are different ledgers, and I keep both. I washed the cake plates while he locked up, and I thought, if I had told him about the cancer that first night, he'd have been gone by Easter, and everyone would have patted his arm at church. Late that night, through the bathroom door, I heard his thumbs tapping out little hailstones on a phone I wasn't supposed to know existed. In May, I did some homework on Whitfield packing, because you should always read the fine print on the people stealing from you. The lease Gerald kept pushing would hand Dana's company my cider house and 30 rows of road frontage for 20 years. 20 years. I'd be dead within one. The trees would outlive the contract. He'd left a folder in his truck cab. Careless the way winners get careless. And inside it was a draft with my name already typed on the signature line. Bernice Foster, trustee. All it wanted was ink. Clipped behind it was a print out of an email from Dana that I read twice in the cab and once more standing in the yard. If she keeps stalling, is there another route? You said you handle her paperwork. You said you handle her paperwork. There it was in 10-point font. The power of attorney I'd just killed. That was the other route. That was Plan B, sitting in a drawer for 2 years with my own signature on it, and Gerald's fee for delivering me was spelled out in the email chain, plain as a seed order, a farm manager's salary once the lease went through, plus what Dana called a finder's consideration. They weren't waiting for me to die. Exactly. Dying was a bonus. They were waiting for me to get tired. Tired enough to sign. Tired enough to stop reading things. Tired enough to be handled. And the bitter joke was that I was getting tired on a schedule only I could read, marked out in infusion, Tuesdays on a calendar nobody else ever checked. I put the folder back in his truck. I smiled at supper. Inside, I moved my deadline up. They needed me worn down. I needed to be finished before I was. The second week of May, after a checkup that went better than I had any right to expect, I stood alone in the cider house with a carpenter's pencil. Tom used to write the harvest tally on the big beam over the press, every year since his father ran the place. Columns of dates and bushels in fading graphite, a whole family history in wood. I found a clear stretch of grain at eye level, and I wrote in block letters, "Last best harvest, 2nd Saturday of October." Then I stood back and looked at it until my eyes behaved. That Sunday at dinner, I made it official. This year's festival would be the biggest we'd ever thrown. Wooltown invited. Hay wagon, both presses running, music, the works. Caleb whooped. Marin started a list on her phone before I'd finished talking, because she is mine. Gerald raised his glass and said to one for the ages, and I clinked my iced tea against his beer, and held his eye and thought, "You have no idea, mister." For everyone else, it was a party. For me, it was a finish line. Every paper signed, every lock changed, every account moved. Done before the 2nd Saturday of October, while my hands still worked and my head was still my own. Now, can I say something to you directly just for a second? If you've ever run out of time and told no one, if you've ever carried a season alone so your family could keep theirs, leave me a comment because I read them and I know you're out there. And if you want to hear how a quiet woman signs her way out of a loud man's plans, stay with me. Subscribing helps more folks like us find this porch. Where was I? June. The scans came back in June. Dr. O'Capor put the pictures up on his screen and allowed himself half a smile, which from him is a marching band, partial response. The spots on my liver had shrunk. This buys months, he said. It does not buy years. I want to be honest. I told him honest was the only currency I still took. So I had my extension, a gift with a receipt attached, because the same chemotherapy that was buying me time had started collecting interest. My fingertips had gone strange. Buttons took planning. Cold silverware bit like a wasp. Neuropathy, Yolanda called it, and the word I heard underneath was handwriting. A trustee is her signature. Everything I had left to do in this world needed a steady pen, and mine was going numb, one finger at a time. So I called Harriet and told her to stop drafting like a lawyer and start drafting like a woman late for a bus. The trust restatement came together in 2 weeks. Marin would step up as co-trustee immediately, not when I died, not if I faded, but now with equal authority over every acre and every account, and Harriet's firm written in as trust protector, so a 21-year-old would never have to stand alone against anyone. She'd be sole successor after me. The farm and cider house to her and Caleb, even shares, college money locked in for both of them, and Gerald Mercer, husband, would receive precisely what the prenup promised him, and not 1 bushel more. Harriet read the final draft out loud, then set it down. Once you sign, your 21-year-old has equal say over everything you built. You've never shared a checkbook in your life, Bunny. Are you ready to be looked after? It was a fair question. It hit bone. No, I said, drafted anyway. She smiled for the first time in 8 years and scheduled the signing for a Friday. The signing took most of an hour and rearranged the rest of my life. Harriet ran that conference room like an operating theater. 2 witnesses from down the hall, a notary with a stamp older than my truck, a letter dated that same morning from Dr. Okafor for certifying that Bernice Foster was of sound mind and full capacity, and a little camera on a tripod in the corner, recording every page turn. Armor, Harriet called it. If anyone ever crawled into a courtroom claiming a sick old woman hadn't known what she was signing, there I'd be on tape, sharp as a tack in my good blazer, answering questions in complete sentences. I'd practiced my signature the night before at the kitchen table. 3 sheets of scratch paper, teaching my numb fingers their old cursive, the way you'd retouch a stroke patient. When the moment came, I wrote Bernice Foster, slow and clean, best penmanship since 4th grade. Restatement of trust, new powers, beneficiary changes on the insurance. That $150,000 would now fund 2 educations instead of 1 condo down payment. Page after page, my family got safer with every stroke of the pen. And somewhere across the county, Gerald was selling a hay rake, not knowing the ground had shifted under his boots. As I signed the last line, Harriet asked more gently than her habit. Why now? Why the hurry? I kept her good pen before I answered. You give the harvest to the ones who tended the tree. She wrote something on her legal pad. I like to think it wasn't billable. Then, with the ink still drying, she opened her desk drawer and set a second stack of paper in front of me, already typed, already tabbed. The petition, Foster versus Mercer. Say the word, Harriet said. I took the petition home in a grocery sack under a bag of onions and thought about it for 3 days, which were not calm days. Understand what filing meant. It meant lawyers on both sides, months of process, discovery, maybe a fight, hours of the exact resource I was rationing. It meant telling my children their stepfather had been holding a going-out-of-business sale on our family. And not filing meant eating breakfast across from a man who checked my coffee intake like a farmer checks a sky, waiting on his weather. Gerald made the decision easier all by himself. All through June, he pushed the lease. He slid the folder next to my dinner plate twice a week. Dana's board needs an answer by Labor Day bun. This is free money. You're being sentimental about a shed. The night I said the cider house wasn't for rent in my lifetime, his charm slipped. 2 seconds, maybe less. The jaw set, the eyes went flat and cold, and I saw the man from the phone messages look out at me through the face of my husband. Then the mask was back on, smooth as ever, and he laughed and called me his stubborn farm girl. 2 seconds was plenty. That same week, Caleb mentioned, innocent as rain, passing the potatoes, that Gerald had put a deposit on a condo in Traverse City. Some investment thing with a friend. He asked me not to bug you with it. Said you had enough on your plate. A condo? A new truck in March. A finder's consideration coming. He was spending it already. Spending my sickness, spending my ending before I had even finished writing it. Monday morning, I drove to Harriet's office before the dew burned off. But there was one thing I had to do first, and it needed my kitchen table. I told my children the truth in halves, and I'll answer for that arithmetic someday. Sunday evening, Marin's apartment in Traverse City. Caleb sprawled on her second-hand couch, Gerald off at a dealership dinner in Grand Rapids. I laid the printed photographs on the table without a speech. The hotel bookings, the messages to Dee, the email about handling my paperwork. I watched my 2 kids age a year apiece in 1 minute. Marin went white, then went to war. She was up pacing, planning press releases to the whole county. Caleb didn't move at all, which is worse. Gerald taught that boy to fly fish. Gerald sat through 4 years of his ball games in a folding chair, and I watched my son fold those memories in half and put them away somewhere. They wouldn't show. Mom, Marin said, we take this to everyone. Church, the co-op, the paper if we have to. And here is where I set the law of this family. So listen close like they did. We would not fight him with noise. Noise was Gerald's home field. He could charm a jury out of its shoes. We'd fight with paper, patience, and a clean conscience. He gets process, I told them. Not drama. Kiet is not the same as weak, Marin argued. She got my temper along with my handwriting. but she witnessed my signature on the petition at that same table, and her name under mine felt like a hand on my back. What I did not tell them, God forgive me, was the other thing: 1 dropped anvil per Sunday. The papers went to the courthouse that Tuesday. That Friday, Gerald sat in the Harborview diner buying Dana Whitfield's lunch with my money, and a polite young man in a polo shirt walked up and asked, "Gerald Mercer?" and handed him an envelope. He came home with the envelope crushed in one fist, and half an hour of speech loaded up, and I gave him my full attention, the way you'd watch community theater, with sympathy for the effort. He ran the whole repertoire. Rage first served at the diner in front of people. Did I understand the humiliation? Then the pivot to charm. Bun, honey, whatever this is, we fix it at home, not through lawyers. Then bargaining. Then a wounded silence engineered for me to fill. I sat mending the elbow of Tom's old chore coat. I do my best thinking with a needle, and when the last speech ran dry, I set my sewing down and laid the printed photographs on the table between us, one at a time, in the order I'd found them. The hotels, the messages, Dana's email about my paperwork. I said nothing the whole time, and I watched him change colors like October, green to red to something that falls. He reached for a story anyway. You have to admire the work ethic. Bunny, listen. It's not what I said. Don't just that. He stopped. In 5 years of marriage, I don't believe I'd ever once seen Gerald Mercer out of words, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a fine view. I picked up my mending and climbed the stairs, and I heard nothing behind me but the ice maker. That night, lying in the dark over the room where he paced, I finally answered him back in my head. 6 months late. You told her I won't be around forever. You were right, mister, but forever isn't yours anymore. I signed forever over to the ones who earned it. In the morning, his lawyer called Harriet, and the slow war started. Here's a thing they don't put in the church bulletin. A small town is a courtroom that never calls the defendant to testify. Gerald didn't move out. Michigan law let him stay in the house while the divorce cooked. So, he set up in the den downstairs like a diplomat in a hostile capital, and he took his case to the county. He didn't say one bad word about me. He's too skilled for that. He just went everywhere. Sat at the co-op counter, sat in the third pew, sat over pie at the Harborview, letting good-hearted people ask what was wrong and then declining to say noli with his eyes wet. Bunny's shutting me out of a marriage I gave everything to. He told Pastor Jim, who told his wife, who told the entire quilting guild I allegedly belonged to. And the town? My town, the town whose kids picked apples in my rows every October, patted his shoulder. Carol from the next farm over cornered me at the feed store, meaning every kindness, and said, "Whatever happened, honey, think hard. He's still got a lot of life left, a lot of life left." I looked at that sweet woman and understood the arithmetic she was doing. The arithmetic the whole county was doing. He had life left. What did I have? An orchard and my ledgers. Nobody asked me a single question. The town read the cover and returned the book. Marin wanted to hand out the truth like flyers at the diner, and I forbade it flat. If the last thing I ever taught my daughter was how to win ugly, that would be my legacy. And I hadn't fought this hard to leave that behind. Then Gerald's lawyer found his big idea, and quiet stopped being an option I could afford. The letter arrived on a Thursday, lawyer to lawyer. Gerald intended to contest the prenup. His claim he'd signed under pressure 2 days before the wedding swept along. Poor lamb. No chance to consult counsel. Harriet read it to me over the phone and translated. "It's weak, Bunny. It will lose, but losing takes time. 8 months, a year if they stretch discovery. They think time costs you nothing." She paused. For most clients, it's true. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and nearly laughed at the size of it. His one weapon was the one thing I didn't have. He didn't even know he was pointing it at me. He just knew stalling raises settlements the way, rain raises creeks. Meanwhile, July's chemotherapy came in like a wet season. There is no dignified way to say it. I spent that Tuesday night on my own bathroom floor, running the faucet to cover the sound, while the man contesting my prenup watched baseball 1 floor down, his laughter coming up through the furnace vent at every double play. I got real acquainted with the grout lines on that floor. I counted them like fence posts and got up when the count came out even, and then past midnight the phone rang. Marin, her voice tight as new wire. "Mom." A nurse from Emson just called me looking for you. Your cell was off. Why does the cancer center have me listed as your emergency contact? The kitchen clock ticked twice. It's a scheduling office, sweetheart. They call about everything. I put you on all my paperwork this spring. You signed half of it yourself, a silence I knew too well. My own silence inherited aimed back at me. Okay, she said, meaning nothing of the kind. By August, the deal that started all this died quietly, the way deals do. With the trust restated and the divorce on the docket, Whitfield Packing's board went another direction. A cold storage site 2 counties over. Dana cut her losses like the businesswoman she is. And with the lease went most of her interest in Gerald. He didn't know I knew, but the signs read easy. The second phone stopped leaving his pocket, then stopped mattering, and his sadness around town stopped being a performance. Late one night, I came down for my pills. I hid them in the flour canister because Gerald hadn't baked in his life, and he was at the kitchen table in the dark, whiskey mostly gone, his father's watch laid out on the wood like a little casket. He didn't do charm. He was too far down for charm. I keep thinking about my mother, he said to the table more than to me. N years in that room, the smell of it. Bunny, I can't sit in a room where somebody's dying. I watched it eat her alive. I know what that makes me. And there it was. The truest sentence Gerald Mercer ever said in my kitchen, arriving 5 months too late to matter. I stood in the doorway in my robe, one hand in my pocket, my fist closed around a pill bottle with an oncologist's name on the label close enough to hand it to him. Some nights I still wonder what he'd have done. I let the wondering pass. Then it's lucky for you, I said, that nobody here is dying. Go to bed, Gerald, he went. That was the closest he ever came to the truth. He slept right through it. The second week of August, my eyes went yellow for real. No light bulb to blame. A fever came with it. The cancer had pinched off the little drain in my liver, and they admitted me to Menson for 3 days to put in a stent, a tiny piece of plumbing, so the works could run again. Gerald was at the state agricultural fair all week and believed I was at Moraine's canning tomatoes. The hospital, doing its job, called my emergency contact. Marin came through that door with her campus, lanyard still around her neck, and she saw it all in one sweep. The wristband with oncology printed on it, the port scar above my gown, the drip pole, her mother the color of late corn. My girl stood at the foot of the bed while everything rearranged itself behind her eyes. The estate cleanup, the quilting Tuesdays, the emergency contact. How long? She said flat like me. Since March, sweetheart. And then I said the thing out loud for the first time since that parking lot to the person who came from my own body. I'm dying, it's my pancreas. There's no fixing it. There's only time and I've spent it making things right. She didn't shout. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her forehead down on my hand. And we stayed like that while the machine counted my heart out loud. When Caleb came, he held my other hand and studied the ceiling for a while. Then Marn straightened up, wiped her face, and I watched her become the woman I just made co-restee. Not alone anymore, Mom. Whatever's left of this, it's ours to carry, too. That's our inheritance, and you don't get to rewrite that part. They wanted one thing changed, and they wanted it that same night. What they wanted was simple, and they were right by every rule. Mine, tell the court. A judge who learns the wife is terminal moves a divorce like a house hire. Sympathy is a lubricant. Tell Gerald, they said. Let him choke on it. I said no. And I want you to understand why. Because everything after hangs on it. The day Gerald knows I'm dying, he becomes the grieving husband. He'll wear my death like a Sunday suit, all over this county for the rest of his life. He does not get the suit. So we went to the settlement conference without my best card, and his lawyer played exactly the game Harriet predicted. Recognition for 5 years of contribution, prepared to litigate the validity of the agreement. Every sentence cost a week, and he spent them like a man who'd found my calendar. Gerald sat across the table in the good jacket from the auction, looking patient, looking certain, looking at a woman he believed had nothing but time and stubbornness. I asked Harriet for 5 minutes, and then I did the arithmetic I'd been doing since March, and I spoke for myself. Gerald, the prenup says 60. I'll make it 95,000. You keep the new truck. Each side pays its own lawyers. In exchange, paper signed this week. The judgment entered the first day the law allows. You're out of my house in 30 days, and you waive every claim against the trust, the estate, and the insurance. Take it or litigate. His lawyer started to object on principle, the principle being billable hours. Gerald hushed him with a hand. Condo deposit gone. Truck payment due. Dana's number gone cold. I watched him count his own math. Harriet's pen hovered to you and only you. I'll say what I couldn't say in that room. I wasn't paying him off. I was buying October. He took the deal, took it fast enough to embarrass his lawyer. Snorts, and then reaching for the pen, he added a condition like a man asking for extra ketchup. One thing, the festival, I should be there, like family. People will expect it, Bunny. It looks strange otherwise. It looking strange. 5 years in, and the man was still negotiating for the audience. I told him, no, plain as a frost date. But I traded him something because I'd learned by then that every door needs a latch. I would never tell this town why my marriage ended. No flyers, no diner testimony, no letter to the editor. He could keep the story. I'd keep the orchard. He blinked at me trying to find the trap in it, because men like Gerald can't imagine giving up the microphone. My children could imagine it fine, and they hated it. Marin called it half a justice. Maybe so, but they'd started dividing me up while I was still standing there. My acres, my ending, my reputation at the feed store, and I'd rather hand out the pieces myself. The judgment entered the last week of September. Foster versus Mercer granted, prenup honored, plus my expensive October. In the courthouse parking lot, I worked the wedding band off over a knuckle. The chemo had thickened, and I dropped it in the envelope where I keep gas receipts. Let me pause here because some of you are yelling at your screen. Tell the town, Bunny, I hear you. But vindication is expensive, and I was on a budget measured in weeks. If you've ever chosen peace over applause, tell me about it in a comment and subscribe, because what happened at that harvest festival is the part I most need somebody to remember. 2 weeks out, Dr. Okafor read my new scans, and his half smile didn't come. The spots were growing again. Chemo had gone from buying months to renting weeks. And the rent was everything I had, my hands, my stomach, my hours upright. Dr. Okafor laid out the options like seed catalogs, and I closed the book. We're done with Tuesdays, I said. I have a festival to throw. He didn't argue. Good doctors know a harvest decision when they hear one. We signed me up with hospice to start the week after the festival, and I walked out of that office lighter than I'd walked in anywhere since March. Here is what I know about last chapters. You don't get to choose the length, only the font. October would be written big. I turned the cider house into a letter factory. Every evening, Marin brewed coffee I mostly smelled instead of drank. And I wrote birthday letters, one each for Marin and Caleb. Every year until they turned 30, sealed and numbered in 2 shoeboxes. Weddings got letters. First babies got letters. First heartbreaks got letters. Caleb rigged his phone on a tripod between the Honeycrisp rows, and I recorded the things paper can't hold. How to tell a ripe apple by the sound it makes coming off the stem. How to listen to the press and know when the cheese is set. The story of how their father lost my wedding ring in the hay and proposed twice in one day. Caleb heckled me from behind the tripod in half the takes, and we kept every one of them. Perfection is for people with time. The last video I made alone one morning, marked for a day I wouldn't see. On the envelope of the letter that went with it, I wrote for the first harvest I miss. The night before the festival, I climbed the stepladder, one more time, and went over the pencil line on the beam, pressing the letters dark. Pencil fades, some things shouldn't. The second Saturday of October came up gold and windless, the kind of day the lake hands out twice a season as an apology for November. They all came. The whole town, and I mean all of it, the co-op men, the church pews, Carol with 3 pies, kids I'd watched grow up now unloading kids of their own into my rows. Both presses ran from 9 in the morning. The hay wagon creaked its circuit. Caleb took festival operations upon himself and directed parking with 2 flags and total authority. I wore my long coat and Tom's old orchard cane, and if my face was thin under the knit cap, well, a farmer's face is entitled to weather. Late afternoon, with the light coming slantwise through the trees the way it does, I gathered just my family by the cider house door. No microphone. This wasn't for the town. I took out the brass key ring. Cider house, barn, fuel shed, farm truck, the whole kingdom on one worn loop that is ridden in a foster pocket since before I was a foster. Your grandfather carried these, I said to Marin, with Caleb standing close. Then your father, then me, now you. I put them in her hand and folded her fingers over them. And I said the other thing, the true thing. I'd rather see them in your hand than imagine them there, she cried. I let her. Then I stood in the doorway and watched my daughter unlock the cider house for the evening pressing. First turn of a key I didn't own anymore. And I felt the strangest weather I've ever felt. Grief and relief in the same gust. Under the northern spy tree, I told my son why you give the harvest to the ones who tended the tree. Toward sundown, a familiar truck eased up the county road and stopped shy of my gate. Gerald got out of the truck alone, and October was not kind to him. He'd lost weight in the face, and the good jacket hung off him like it was going back to the auction. He stopped at the gate, even he wouldn't cross it, and waited for me the way he used to wait for applause. Around the yard, conversation lowered itself like a flame turned down. Folks didn't stare. This county sideways watches. I walked to the gate with Tom's cane, taking my time because my time was finally mine. Bunny, he'd rehearsed. I know. Rehearsed when I hear it. I made a mistake. One mistake against 5 good years. Dana's gone. That's finished. It was never real. Everything I actually have is standing on this farm. I'm asking for a conversation. That's all. One conversation. And here is the moment I had been carrying since March. The one I'd turned over on chemo Tuesdays and courthouse Mondays. In the pocket of my coat, folded small, my thumb knew the edge of it. The hospice intake letter dated for this coming Monday. One sentence out loud. I have been dying the whole time, Gerald, through every stall and every sad face you sold this town. And the man would spend the rest of his life buried under it. And every lowered voice in this yard would know I'd been wronged beyond their imagining. Total vindication, one breath wide. I looked at him a long moment, and I'm telling you the truth. What I saw wasn't my enemy. I saw a scared boy at the door of a sick room, still running. And I understood, standing at my own gate with my family's laughter behind me, that his account and mine were closed, and mercy was the only thing left worth spending. But mercy with a boundary. Go home, Gerald, that's all. He waited for more because there was always more from everybody. His whole charming life, there wasn't more. He got in the truck, and the county road took him, and not one person in that yard moved to follow. I walked back to the press, and Marin handed me the first cup of the evening run. I had one bullet left in this world, and I buried it in the orchard. Some victories you keep by never showing them. Hospice came that Monday, like the letter said, and the farmhouse rearranged itself around a hospital bed by the big south window, where the bed could look down the rows. November was gentler than I deserved. And now I'll tell you the hardest thing I did all year, harder than chemo, harder than the gate. I let them take care of me. You'd think dying would be the hard part. For a woman like me, being carried was harder. Marin ran the medication chart in a spiral notebook, her columns so much like mine it made my chest ache. Dose, hour, initials, the same hand that'll keep the spray schedules. Now Caleb, my quiet boy, took over my hands. Every evening he'd wash them warm and work lotion into the knuckles slow, like he was oiling something precious that had run dry for years. And we didn't talk much because we never needed to. Caleb brought me one apple every single day, set it on the windowsill, and called it medicine, completely deadpan. Some snorts days I believed him. I had spent my whole life being the strong one, the one who signs, fixes, carries, plans. It took dying to teach me the other half of love. Being fed soup by your son is a kind of church. Letting your daughter lock up your farm at night is a kind of prayer. Turns out the bravest thing I ever did was let somebody else drive. I finished the last birthday letters in that bed. I sealed the envelope marked for the first harvest I miss, and I told Marin the instructions plain. Next October, under the northern spy, out loud everybody present. She wrote it in the notebook, initialed it like a dose. The first hard frost came on a Thursday. I remember thinking, the trees know how to do this. Let go, then bloom. This is where I hand over the keys one last time. My daughter tells the rest. It's her ring now. My name is Marin, and my mother died on the 3rd of December, just before sunup with the window cracked an inch, because she wanted to hear the wind in the rose. We were both there, me and Caleb, one on each side of her. She went quiet, like she did everything on her own terms, in the house her hands had held together since she was 20 years old. The funeral filled the church past the coat rack, and half the county stood in the vestibule, and Gerald came, slid into the last pew during the first hymn, dressed sharp, face arranged. I recognized the arrangement. My mother had described it exactly. The grieving, almost husband come to collect the town's sympathy one more time. Then Pastor Jim gave the remembrance and read what Mom had asked him to read. That she'd been diagnosed in March. That she'd fought it through spring and summer without complaint. That she'd planned her own goodbye down to the last letter. Through everything. The pastor said, through business troubles and personal troubles alike, she carried it alone, so her family could live free of it a little longer. You could watch the dates land on Gerald pew by pew, the whole church doing the same math at the same time. March, before the petition he'd cried about at the diner, before the settlement, where he'd squeezed a dying woman for an extra $35,000, before the gate, and go home. Gerald. He sat through it with his jaw working, and the people who'd patted his shoulder all summer found somewhere else to look. Every last one of them. Nobody spoke to him at the reception. Nobody had to. He came to be seen as the widower. He left as the man everyone finally saw. I'll keep the ending the way Mom kept everything. Short rows, clean lines. By spring, the settlement money was mostly gone. The truck payment and the back rent on a room above the laundromat saw to that. Nobody ran Gerald out of town. That's the part I want you to hear straight, because Mom insisted on it. Nobody punished him. The co-op still sells to him, polite as a toll booth. The Harbor View still pours his coffee. It's only that the pie stopped coming with sympathy, and the conversations stand up and excuse themselves when he sits down. Whitfield Packing leased a cold storage site 2 counties east. Dana Whitfield has never once said his name in public, which may be the coldest sentence in this whole story. And no, the world didn't learn its lesson. This spring, a man 2 roads over left his wife in the middle of her treatments, and some folks still poured him coffee and said he had a lot of life left. Mom didn't fix the world. She fixed our corner of it, 140 acres of it, held in a trust that runs like her handwriting, straight and clear. The college fund is doing exactly what she built it to do. Caleb rebuilt the press bearings in March, muttering to Dad's old tools. I run the books at her desk, and twice a month I catch myself reaching for the phone to ask her something, and once I dialed. In April, Caleb turned 19, and we crowded on the couch while the first envelope came open and the first video played. There was Mom among the Honeycrisps when moving her collar, laughing at something Caleb had hollered from behind the tripod. She looked into the camera and told him that 19 is when you learn the difference between being liked and being trusted, and that he should go ahead and want both, but never trade the second for the first. We laughed and cried in the same breath, which I've come to believe is the family recipe. Caleb keeps her festival flags behind the seat of his truck, and on the beam over the press. Her block letters sit under Grandpa's tallies where they belong. Last best harvest, 2nd Saturday of October. She was right about that too. It was the best one until this year's, which brings me to the letter. The 2nd Saturday of this October came up gold again, as if the weather keeps her calendar now. We ran both presses. The town came back, all of it, and nobody mentioned the empty lawn chair by the cider house door, and everybody saw it. At dusk, I took the brass keys out of my pocket, and my hands shook worse than hers ever did. Under the northern spy tree, with Caleb holding the lantern at my shoulder, I opened the envelope marked for the first harvest I miss, and I read my mother's handwriting out loud to the family she built. My loves, if Marin is reading this, then the orchard did what orchards do. It outlived the farmer, which is the whole point of planting. Don't you dare stand under my tree being sad on a pressing day. Taste this year's run and argue about it like your father would. Watch your brother on the ladders and remember what I told you, with the keys in my hand. You give the harvest to the ones who tended the tree. You tended me, all of you. I got the best rows. It was signed the way she signed everything. No flourish. Just her name sure of itself. Bunny Foster. Caleb set an apple on the sill of Mom's window that night. And this is what my mother taught me. A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you place with your own warm hands into the hands that helped you grow it. That's our story. One diagnosis kept quiet, one signature that got there first, and one short sentence at the edge of an orchard. If this reminded you to update your own paperwork, your trust, your power of attorney, your emergency contacts, take it as a sign from Bunny and do it this week. Share this with someone who carries too much alone. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and we'll see you at the next.